Hey everybody, welcome to Dad Talk today. I am your host, Eric Carroll, joined as always by
Chris Gannon.
and Chris is actually beside me for this one, so it's a little bit different than the podcast we usually do. But today we have a very special guest, Miss Dawn McCarty. Dawn, how you doing?
Great, guys. How you guys doing?
Doing all right. So Dawn, you are also the Florida chairperson for NPO. Tell us a little bit about what you do over there.
So NPO has done some studies and research on each state's statutes on how they handle shared parenting, and shared parenting meaning not just the time frame, 50-50, but actually having parents being equal, so that one parent doesn't have more power over the other parent. And we want those laws in place so that when people go through divorces, children still have their connection and their bond with their parents, with both parents, so that they don't lose that connection.
Gotcha. That's awesome. And there's also a report card. Could you explain that report card that NPO does?
Sure. So each state gets a grade, and for Florida, we got a C+. So we went up a little bit from a C to a C+. There's only 2 states in the country right now that have an A, and that is Kentucky, and then Arizona has an A-. So from there, most of the states are averaging about Cs.
I got you. That's awesome. Well, everybody, Dawn has a story, much like what we heard last week with the Isaac sisters, and we're going to get a little bit into that. So, Dawn, tell us about where you grew up and what it was like growing up being Dawn.
Oh, wow. Well, not many people would want to be Dawn growing up. I've kind of been everywhere. I was born here in Florida, but then we moved when I was really young to California. And my parents worked for, actually they worked for Sammy Davis Jr. in Hollywood, California. And we hung out with him and a lot of other singers and actors. And we would spend time over at Sammy's house. And there's a lot of things about memories that I think it's an important aspect to what children go through and how they transition through life. And when they're erased from another family member, those memories actually hold a lot of merit to what's happening in the child's mind. So grounding, for example, when you go through the effects of what happens to a child, sometimes those memories are what a child holds onto, and it kind of helps anchor them into a reality that they recognize when they're going through an identity crisis. So as we talk about this, I'll explain that a little bit more in detail to clarify. So it's probably confusing it to start with.
Right. So, Dawn, from what I was picking up, you were alienated from your dad very early on.
Yeah. So when we were all living together in Hollywood until I was about 2. And I was, back then I was a thriving, tenacious, stubborn child. I'm still stubborn, but, there was things that I would do. My parents would manage the apartment complex, and they would go door to door and knocking on the doors asking people to pay the rent. Well, I decided to help, so I went around asking for cookies and candy. And I had, we knew everybody there, so they knew who I was, and I'd come around once a month asking for cookies and candy. I was brave. I was, outgoing. I was always into something. I enrolled myself into daycare, and my mom didn't know it. And then she tried to enroll me in daycare one day, and they said, "Oh, so you're Dawn's mom," not knowing that I had been going there already for the last 2 months ahead of time. So at one point, my mom kind of disappeared, and I didn't know what happened. And we went to visit her one day at another place that she was living at. And I can remember this apartment complex. I remember so many things about that time frame. I remember what our apartment looked like. I can describe the outside of the building, the inside of our apartment, where our couch was, where our TV stand was. I can remember going to my mom's apartment and how that was laid out just a little bit. And I didn't realize the day that we went to visit her at her apartment that was the last day I was going to see her for a while. So she disappeared, and I didn't see her again for 2 years. So 2 years later, she had remarried, and she and her husband decided they wanted to put their family together. He had a daughter So they wanted to put the family together. And she had probably told him, all these horrible things about my real dad, and, being the type of person he was, he needed to come and rescue her daughter and get her away from this terrible man that, she left me with. So if he was that terrible, then my question's always been, well, why did you leave me then? So as I go through this, I want to make clear too, and this isn't about bashing my mom or trying to get vengeance or making her come to the table with explanations, because there's a process that you go through, and you have to heal. So just wanted to throw that in there real quick. So
that's crazy, Don. I just wanted to touch on it. The fact that she would leave and then you're with your dad, she voluntarily left, and then tries to make it look and can convince somebody. That's the crazy part. Can convince somebody that the guy that she left you with was a no good person and that they had to go rescue you.
Exactly. Yeah. And, and I don't have the exact story that it was actually a rescue. I just know that I know their dynamics, and I know how they are and how they interact together. And he is that kind of person that would do anything to rescue or, take care of her and her daughter. So I can see that happening, that he would actually, do that. So when they came down to California, I was going to my babysitter's house, and I was going up the stairwell, and I heard my name being called, and I turned around, and there's my mom. So of course I recognized her. I'm 4 at this point. I think I'm almost 5. And I run down the stairs, and as soon as I got down those stairs, she grabbed a hold of me, and she just turned around and took off running. And she goes around the corner, and she throws me into this car in the front seat, and she starts pushing me next to this man, this stranger, and says, "This is your new daddy." And she jumps in the seat behind me. She slams the door, and we just took off, hit the road. So it was literally abducted me off the stairwell of my dad's, actually my babysitter's stairwell. So from there, they took me to a houseboat. We hid out on the houseboat for a whole week while the investigation was going on. And the FBI was there. There was, the whole city was looking for a missing child. Only I wasn't really missing. I was, with my mom and her new husband. So as the investigation died down, they finally felt safe enough to move me from the boat to an airplane that was waiting to taxi as soon as I was on board. So we got on board, they closed the door, wheels up, and off we went. And that was the last I saw LA and my dad. And that world literally just disappeared.
Dawn, I have a question. How old were you when you finally first realized what happened in that situation? Like all the details that you know now.
Well, a lot of this I remember. I remember the abduction. I remember joking about being abducted almost my whole life when I was, well into being a member of a different family in a different world. When I was in high school, we talked about it. In fact, my mom would joke, we just went down there and kidnapped her, and it was a joke. And we didn't really think anything. I didn't think it was wrong at the time because I didn't know what I didn't know. I just knew that she came and she took me from my dad. And I always wondered. And whenever I asked about him, she would say, well, that's not your dad anymore. He's your dad. This is your dad. And she would always preface, and she still does to this day, your dad. When she's talking about your dad, she means my stepdad. And so I kind of lost my track.
That's all right, because I just want to touch on something. We said something about this not long ago. That's one of the sick things that I see, like narcissists and alienators do. They're bitter because of this breakup, and then they do these bad things. But I'm gonna go get this new person. This is your new dad. This is your new mom, and it's to completely erase that other parent. And I think that is child abuse. That is straight up child abuse, and it's also abuse to that parent, because they do not deserve that. No matter who you get in a relationship, that's not going to replace the biological parent unless there is a need. Every so often, there are some great stepmoms and great stepdads out there. But, if you have a perfectly capable parent over there and you're trying to replace them with somebody else, shame on you.
Yeah, and in fact, as the investigation finally caught up to us and they found out where I was, the police department came and knocked on the door and asked her if she knew where I was, and the only thing she said was, "Well, she's my daughter." So that was the end of it. There was no, well, the dad wants to see her. So my dad did try to come up and see me. He came up from California up to Colorado, is where they had taken me. And she basically told him, you're never going to see her again, and shut the door on us, on him. So that didn't ever go anywhere. And he felt, because they were unmarried, that he didn't have any recourse whatsoever. So he was just stuck and felt like he couldn't do anything. So he was depressed for many, many years, and it took him about 12 years before he decided to remarry and have an additional family. So it was something that really affected him quite a bit.
Don, now looking back, when your mom originally took off, what do you think the actual reason is? I mean, looking back at it now, when she just took off and left you with your dad, why was that?
Well, I think that she was never really she wasn't a nurturing type of mom. She didn't know she was pregnant with me until she was about 5 months. She had me early, so she literally was like pregnant for a total of 3 months in her mind. She's never held a baby before. She never had to babysit. She didn't have siblings, and all of a sudden she was responsible for this other person, and she just was never good at it. She wasn't good at being that nurturing person that a child would need. So I think in her mind, with the, whatever happened between the two of them, and no matter what happened, to me, they were both young and they were both stupid, just like any of us, right? We all do things that we, as we're growing in our own emotional stability, maturing in that aspect, we all do things, and that's how we learn and we grow. So I totally get that things happened that between the two of them, but that doesn't mean that it should affect me in that way, or any child in that way. So I think she just decided that it wasn't for her, and she just left. And it wasn't until she remarried and he wanted to have that family, that image of the perfect family, that she's like, oh yeah, well, I have a daughter. And so they came and got me.
That's crazy. Don, I'm curious, what are some of these symptoms, some of the side effects you saw from that alienation, from your mom taking you away from your dad at such an early age?
Well, and that's a great question, because it doesn't matter how young you are. There's a lot of things that the children do actually remember. And I remember, like I was explaining to you earlier, I have a lot of memories, and those memories are actually important, because when she ripped me out of the one world and she shoved me into the new one, overnight, I had a new house, I had a new bed, I had new clothes, I had new toys, I had a new daddy, and I had a new stepsister. Everything changed, and I knew nothing. The only thing that was the same was her, but I hadn't seen her in 2 years. So there was no transition for me. And we didn't get any kind of help. They didn't take me to a therapist to help me acclimate or adjust to the new environment. None of that happened. It was just open and shut case. You're not there anymore. That's not your dad anymore. Stop calling him dad. This is your dad. And I was forced to call my stepdad dad. And my stepsister hated that. She hated it to the point that she violently abused me for the next 8 years. And she has pinned me down, arms pinned, beaten my head into the ground. She strangled me to death, where I almost died. But the only thing that saved me is our parents pulled into the driveway and she let go and dropped me. And I think the drop actually knocked the air back into me. But nothing was ever done about that either. There was no help for that.
I was going to ask, was there a difference made between the two of you?
Between me and my stepsister?
Yeah.
Well, she's 6 years older than I was.
Right.
And the fact that she didn't like that her parents weren't together anymore, she never accepted my mom as the new wife. And now all of a sudden there's this little girl that is now her sister and calling her dad, and she was resentful.
She took it out on you.
She took it out on me. And then, there's a lot of things that, I mean, it's horrible to think that someone could get so violent with a child.
Right.
But I also will give credit where credit's due, I think that she had some issues that we didn't realize until later. And
Right.
because they never got her help, I was her punching bag. She took it all out on me.
Now, what's that relationship like now? Has she ever came to full realization of what she did, offered you an apology? What's going on with that now?
She's never apologized. We've gone up and down on, good relationship, bad relationship. Now we're in a total, I wrote that family off because they've never accepted me. I was never part of that family. There was no bonding like it should have been. When you have a step parent step into the picture, they need to accept that package 100%. It's not just the spouse or the boyfriend or the girlfriend with kids. It's a family unit that you have to accept all of it. And if you can't do that, then maybe that's not such a great idea. But the extended family was never there as well. So there's a lot more involved in that step family. Can they step in and be an extended family for that child? Because it does go beyond just new stepmommy or stepdaddy or step-sibling.
And that's the thing with blended families, Don. A lot of times we see somebody that either tries to rush into it too quick, like, hey, I'm your new dad, I'm your new mom, and this is the rules, and this is this, or you got the ones that don't try at all. I think we've really got to meet somewhere in the middle, and it grows on you, but you gotta make a relationship. It needs to be just like your own kids. Now, we talked a little bit about that the other night with boundaries and different things. And until everybody's comfortable and they're acclimated with each other, you really got to nurture that relationship and get to know those children in your house. And I don't think enough step parents are doing that.
No, and I think that, sometimes they don't think about it. Like you were saying, it's so easy to just jump in or dive in, and because it all feels good right now. And then when things start going rough, or you start getting into more of a complicated relationship with the children or the mom, or maybe one of the parents may not allow you to discipline that child, which makes it kind of hard for you to step in and actually be a step parent. Or maybe sometimes they're parents, and I hate to say this, but sometimes parents aren't parenting, even with it doesn't matter. They're just not parenting.
And, I think most parents' idea of parenting and discipline and everything now is, I'm taking away your iPhone, or I'm taking away the iPad. When I was growing up, Don, I had consequences. My dad was 6'9", and he was a preacher man.
Mm-hmm.
We had a lot more done to us than our toys taken away. But you're definitely right. One place that I'm curious of is with you going through that alienation and seeing what it was like with this step family that didn't really blend so well. Were there some long-term effects later on that you saw in your own parenting, or like in your relationships, having trouble to bond with somebody or be vulnerable to them?
Well, yeah, and backing up just a little bit, it wasn't just that my mom spoke ill of my real dad or that she just erased him. There was emotional abuse and there was physical abuse. So my stepdad never once laid a hand on me, first of all, I'll say that. But there was no bonding or attachment. And that attachment has to exist for a child. And without that, there are long-term effects that dampens the self-esteem and the confidence of a child. I was always in trouble. I was always being pushed aside. I remember when I first got to the family or to the new, my new world, my twilight zone, I remember wanting to hug somebody. I needed hugs. I needed reassurance. And the child gets that reassurance and that security by physical contact, by getting hugs and, that nurturing from their parent. And I didn't get that. I didn't have that. I remember being peeled off, like, okay, go play, go, get away. And as you grow, it's really hard for you to attach to other people. And we moved around so much, I never really got a long-term relationship. So this just kind of compiles and snowballs.
Right.
Dawn, my question to you is, Christina Felderman, we had her on a few weeks ago. She talked about how not having her father in her life caused her to be, I guess, a little bit needy and pick the wrong
Mhm.
guys that took advantage of her. Did you experience any of that once you started dating and maybe when you got a little bit older?
Yeah, that's one thing about the guests that you've had and other people that I've talked to is we have so much in common, yet we've never talked or shared our stories. And we almost can say exactly the same thing. And there was times where, as an adult, because I wasn't allowed to date when I was in high school, so I didn't learn how to deal with conflict because in our house, like the day that my sister strangled me, there was no punishment. We basically sat at a table and they handed us a piece of paper and a pencil and said, we don't want to hear a word about it, just write it down. And that was it. So I didn't know how to deal with conflict. And I'll tell you, when you're dating, that's one of the key aspects that you need to know how to deal with is conflict, because two different people trying to work together. And then that develops. And as that develops, you start getting into a more of a relationship. You're considering marriage or you do get married. You have to be able to know how to deal with those emotions and the conflict. And I never learned that. So when I'm married, all I know is what I brought with me, right? And I'm just reacting because my whole life has been about reacting. I've never really been able to just respond in a healthy way because I didn't learn how to do that. I didn't have that example. So when I got to the point where I'm now married and considering a divorce, it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. And I couldn't, the hard part for me was I would rather stay than take my kids' father away from them. And I remember thinking, I'll just deal with it, and there were so many things that were going on in that marriage that nobody would want to stay. But I felt like I really had to give it that shot.
And Dawn, it's not hard to see where I don't know the details of how your marriage fell apart, whether there was abuse or domestic violence, but it's not hard to see with a little girl who grew up without her father, how she would get in a relationship like that and then not have the strength or courage to get out. And I have to thank you because I think the way you just explained that story and the emotions and how it's affected your life is probably the best way I've ever heard anybody explain it and rationalize it as an adult.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. One of the things too that I remember, I did have a father figure, right? So he, on my wedding day, the advice he gave me was, no matter what you do, always protect his ego. That was my wedding day advice. And I'm thinking, his ego, oh my gosh, what do I got to do? And I'm thinking, okay, so I have to really be careful. And I walked on eggshells because I was so worried about his ego, and I didn't understand what that meant. I didn't know. I just felt like, okay, I have to do whatever. I can't let him be upset, and I already hated being around people that were angry or upset because I didn't know how to deal with that. And now I have to worry about an ego on top of it. And what happens is I have an ego, right? What happened to my ego? My ego was destroyed because I was so busy protecting his. Nobody told me to watch out for my own.
Right.
And that is a very important thing. And there was one other time that he tried to tell me about this ego thing, and I turned around and I let him have it. It's like, don't talk to me about egos because mine was crushed and you didn't protect mine. So no more of that. And that was a nice way of
Right.
how I
Guys, I'd
said
like
it.
to take a second to give a shout out to our sponsors because without them, we would not be able to do what we're doing today. We are sponsored by the Isaac Law Firm as well as our newest sponsor, the Clock Law Firm, Upstream Growth Consultants, the Father's Rights Movement, and the House Champ, Mr. Yaya McLean. Don, getting back into this, I'm curious, what was the reunification process like? Did you get to reunify with your dad? And if so, what was that process?
So for all my entire life, I always thought about my dad. From the time I was little, from the time that they took me, I wanted my dad. I wanted him to come and rescue me from this hell that I was in, this twilight zone that I couldn't relate to or adjust to. I always wondered every time I walked down the street, I'm like, is that him? Is that him? Could that be him? What's he look like? What do I look like? Do I look like him? So many questions that the curiosity was sometimes unbearable, to the point where you just put everything in a Pandora's box and you're like, I can't deal with this, so it's just got to go in this box. And it stays there. And that's fine. But then as you go along and you're accumulating so much stuff in that box, because once you start putting it in there, you got to keep putting it in there. You can't just stop and deal with things, because you have to deal with those first issues. So I didn't get his birthday. I knew his name. It's on my birth certificate. But I didn't know his birth date. I didn't know how old he was. I had one picture of him. She let me have one picture. And it was a profile picture of him. So I couldn't even really tell. And of course, he was super young. So now we're looking at someone that's his age. So it's really hard to tell what he looks like. So she finally, in 2008, 2009, she gave me his birthday. And that is what helped open up when I became a private investigator, so that I could, see if that would help me get into different databases, or, find different ways and avenues of searching for him, really digging deep. And I found a marriage license with someone that had the same name, same birth date, and then the name of the spouse. So I started trying to find that, and I think I would find them, and I would send them a card and say, hey, I'm looking for my dad, and having to be really careful, because you don't know what you're going to dump on somebody out of the blue. So I was just really cautious about how I approached it, and it was returned because they had already moved. So fast forward, a couple years go by each and every time that I would get this close, and then it would be like deflation, and almost want to give up. So then time comes again, and I finally get on Facebook, and that's when I actually found the same person's name that was on that marriage license, that had was a friend with someone with my dad's name. And I reached out, and you're thinking, gosh, what do I say? Hey, I'm your long lost daughter is not something you want to start with, because you don't know if his wife even knows about me. So you could really blow somebody's relationship up, and I wasn't interested in doing that. So I had to dig a little deeper in the friend list until I found my actual brother that I didn't realize at the time. And I said, hey, my name is Dawn. I'm looking for my dad. It was back, I hadn't seen him since I was 4. And he's like, well, I have a sister named Dawn. And I'm like, he goes, but we haven't seen her in a while. And I said, well, I was kidnapped by my mom. And he goes, yep, no, that's what happened to my sister. And I'm like, whoa, this can't be. I almost felt like I was in a dream, and I had to call my son in. I'm like, did I just hear this right? So he starts reading it, and he's like, no, that's what he said. And I said, well, then are you my brother? And he's like, I must be. And I said something about, do you think, your dad would be interested in talking to me? He goes, well, I'll find out. Within 5 minutes, I was on the phone with my dad. It was that fast.
What was that conversation like? And, Don, a lot of times when people talk about reunification, they think it's going to be butterflies and rainbows. Was it that way for you?
It was such an emotional time. And this is something that when you hear me talk about stuff today, I talk about how parents need to be prepared for that reunification. This is why. Because when we first got on the phone, I knew that there was one question I could ask him that I would know for no matter what, he is my dad. I didn't need a DNA test. I didn't need any of that. I knew if he knows the answer to this question, he's my dad. So the first thing I asked him is, what celebrity did we hang around with when I was 2? And he's like, you mean Sammy Davis Jr.? And right there, I knew 100%. This is why memories are important too. That's why I started with this session with that, is because, children remember a heck of a lot more than we think they do. And sometimes they suppress it. Some people remember more than others, but it's there. I remember clear back to when I was 2. It's possible. So as we started talking and I started hearing his side of the story, and I started realizing, the realization is the part that was the Pandora's box. It actually bursted open. And I was so full of emotions that I've never been able to, I've always been able to handle my emotion somewhat, for what I knew, but I could not deal with this by myself. And I had to go get help because I was angry. I cried for over a week, all day long. He cried, and, we'd talk and we were just crying, and it was just constant. And it wasn't that I was mad at him at all because he hadn't done anything, but the more we shared, the more I realized, holy crap, I missed out on 3 brothers. I have 3 brothers. I didn't get to watch them grow up. I could have babysat them. I could have been involved to some extent. And then I found out that he didn't know that I was adopted. Nobody contacted him. I'd never even seen my own adoption records. I've never seen my own birth certificate that they replace until the day I went and I asked for a copy of my own birth certificate. And that's when I realized, oh, wow, it was a real adoption, because they wouldn't give me a copy of my real birth certificate with Dawn Andrea McCarty on it.
Right.
So I had to change my name back legally to my birth name. But as we're going through this transition and we're finding out his side of the story versus what my mom said and what I actually remember, that's when I started thinking I knew what was right. I knew who was telling me the truth, because I know that person. You might have tried to make me forget him, but that doesn't work. I didn't forget him. I still remembered him. I just wasn't allowed to talk about him.
Right.
And when children are told not to talk, sometimes it's easier just to forget it. But when they want to find somebody, they will. When they want to know, they will.
Well, if you're told to forget somebody and you've got extreme consequences if you do bring it up, as a child, that can be a little bit intimidating. I'm curious, though, Dawn, did you have contact with your mom again after reunifying with your dad?
Yeah, I went through a period of time where I thought I could just walk away from her and never talk to her again. And that was pretty much during when Pandora's box blew open, because I felt like I had a fire hose aimed at my chest, full blast. And there was so much to try and adjust to and understand and comprehend and figure out, when you start saying, okay, well, now I know that's a lie. This was a lie. I mean, she told me he was such a terrible person that the Hells Angels were trying to kill him, that he made friends fast, but he made enemies faster, and that it would be dangerous if I were to find him. I mean, these were terrible things that she tried to make me afraid to find him. And when I finally, as an adult, told her I'm looking for him, she's like, oh, well, and I'm like, listen, I'm not asking for your permission. I'm just telling you out of courtesy that I'm looking for him and I'm going to find him. And it was at that point that she finally realized that I was going to do it, and that's when she finally gave me his birth date back in 2009.
That is crazy. So, with your mom, did you kind of come to grips with that? Was there forgiveness there, or is there still a little bit of resentment? Did you realize it was maybe a mental thing, or I'm just curious what your thoughts was on that.
So forgiveness for me, when I explain this, because I don't know if I write about emotions, and with the Girl Behind the Fence series, try to help people realize we go through emotions, and then how do you heal from it. So as I share my story, forgiveness is not where you start. It's not the first step. The first step is understanding, learning from it, healing, so that you can forgive. Because if you say, okay, I forgive in the beginning, is it really forgiveness?
It's an open wound until you start to form a scab.
Right, and I don't mean like it's an intentional, I'm just in denial. I mean, yeah, it's still a wound until you have put that whole thing into perspective. And until that perspective comes and you can, say, okay, I know what this is, and I don't own this piece. I'll take this piece. This piece is going over here because that's them, and I'm going to just learn how to live with this piece. So I've learned how to live with the fact that I was kept from my father for 44 years on false pretenses, that there was a lie when the adoption was happening, and the affidavit was completed by my mom saying my dad was never in the picture and he never provided support. That's when the state of Oregon decided that they were going to waive their investigation based off of this affidavit with incorrect information on it, and that they would go ahead and allow her husband to adopt me because he's readily available. So now I'm like, that's when I found my birth certificate. That's how I found this part out. I didn't know about this part until a year ago. So when you're going through all this stuff, and there's pieces that are added as you go. So we already know the first part, right? We already know she abducted me, right? And I didn't realize that was bad until I was started looking into a group called Take Root at the time, and I participated in a study about parental abduction. Then, so back to trying to work through all this stuff, you can't wholly forgive until you know it all, and you don't know enough to actually give that forgiveness, because when you keep hearing more things as you dig and as you find out, that anger keeps coming back. It is a cycle. So I'll go through and I'll be in a good place with my mom, and then I'll be upset with her again because I found out something else, or I thought about something else, or I finally realized, something else that had happened. So it's a constant cycle, but it gets better as I go. And it's
Did you
easier now to talk
recognize
to
the
her.
different points of that relationship, how to handle certain things and not to let them get to you maybe like they once did?
Well, we're in a different place, and she doesn't know a lot about what's going on. She doesn't know that I'm advocating and I'm out here doing this kind of stuff, because there's a lot of things that I have gone through with her as I grew up, where it would always turn out to be more about her. So if I would complain about something, for instance, I was raising my kids by myself, and it was tough being a single mom, and I struggled quite a bit. And she would say, "Oh yeah, I know what it's like to be a single mom, and I had a hard time too." And I'm thinking, wait a minute, when were you a single mom? And she would kind of say that because her husband traveled all the time, that she was a single mom. That's totally not even the same thing. So she would turn my turmoil into her, it was bad for her too, and so many different things. She claimed that she was abducted by her mom when, a slightly different situation. She didn't rip me away, she wasn't ripped away from her biological father. She was taken away from her grandmother. That's
Right.
different, totally different. So I don't talk to her about a lot of this because I don't want it to be about her anymore. It's not even really about me anymore, because after finding my dad, we had 2 years before he passed away again. And I lost him a second time in one lifetime. We had 16,060 days apart, and we maybe had 3 weeks of time together in that 2 years time frame, 2 weeks face to face. So I can't let it to be about her, and I can't get my dad back. So me out here talking about this is not helping my situation, but because of him and the pain I know that he went through and the stuff that he shared with me, I'm out here advocating for him.
That's right. It's to bring the awareness.
Mm-hmm. And I'm speaking for those kids that do not have a voice, right now, or maybe they're adults and now they're thinking about, maybe I'll share my story. And the more people I talk to, and I have people on Twitter and on Facebook that are in other countries, and the more I talk to people, the more they want to speak up, the more they need to share their story. And the more of us that come through and start sharing our story, we can start showing that, hey, you made decisions based on what you thought was in my best interest, but I'm going to tell you that it wasn't. This is what was in my best interest.
Looks like we just had a special guest pop up on the screen, and I'm going to have to talk to them. But I got one last thing I want to ask you, Don, before we get off of this. It looks like we got a little surprise for you guys. Don, for any mother out there that might be alienating their child from their father, or the opposite, for any father that might be alienating the mother out there from their child, what would you say to them?
Don't do it. If you love your child and you want to have a relationship, a healthy relationship, then it's not worth it, because my relationship with my mom is strained. It's forever strained. It's never going to be a great relationship. It's not going to be close. At best, we were friends,
Right.
but there's never going to be a time where I have respect over what was done, and the damage is done. So if you do it, you risk losing your kid.
You need to heed that advice. Well, everybody, it looks like we had a special guest pop up on the screen. Christina, what are you doing here?
I don't know. What am I doing here? Hi, guys. How's it going?
We're doing
there.
all right.
Hi, Dawn.
Hey there.
So we told everybody that we was going to have a special surprise tonight. So, do y'all have a clue what it might be?
Hmm.
Hmm.
I do. Do you?
Let's take a look at this over here.
Drum roll, please.
Ooh, check that out.
What is that?
Mom Talk Today.
Oh my God.
Stay cool, stay mom. They ripped us off.
Oh my Lord.
We did. We're taking over.
Dawn and Christina.
I think they're kind of cuter than us too. We might be in trouble.
Dude, I am so jealous. Our ratings just went out the window. We'll never be able to get an audience
We're
again.
done. We're finished.
We're done. You two are starting your own podcast?
Yes. Yep. We are
we
really
are.
excited.
You know,
We are really excited.
very, very exciting thing. That's something that people have been asking for ever since we started over here at Dad Talk Today. It was like, well, what about moms? It's like, well, I got to find some. And, we've been working on that for a while, and you two caught my eye, and I was like, I think they could really, really get something good going on there. So I'd like you to talk a little bit. What are you exactly wanting to do over there at Mom Talk Today, and what is your plan? Both of you grew up as alienated children, and you're hoping to bring that message to others. So tell everybody a little bit about what the platform's going to be about.
Well, like you said, we know what it's like to go through this as children, and being able to share that, and also we have some empathy on what a child goes through, and being moms, we also know that aspect as well. I wasn't an alienated mom, but I did go through a divorce, and although I didn't try to get my kids to hate their dad, I didn't encourage them to have a relationship, because I figured, parents are, they're not required really, because my mom abandoned me, and then she later came back and abducted me and then gave me a new dad. So I figure, growing up, it's like, well, if you don't want to participate and help me raise our kids, then I can do it by myself. So this is a transgenerational thing that children are learning, and we're going into these relationships with no requirements really. There's no criteria. There's a problem from the start. So this is something that Christina and I are going to be able to share as we talk to people about both sides, not just being an alienated mom, but we both have that power of being that alienated child or that erased child as well.
Absolutely. I agree. And I think just being an alienated mom, when I was going through it, I didn't know any other mom who was. And I think being able to provide that space to let other moms and women know that, they're not alone, and be able to provide them resources and help them navigate through such a difficult time from a woman's perspective, and from the perspective of both of us being alienated children, and, having that perspective of an alienated mom as well, and understanding everything that comes along with that. And I think it delves a little deeper than the broad spectrum. I think there's a lot of dads in the group, and I think really targeting and being able to provide that to moms and women who are going through it is really special.
Right, because kids have parents, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about mom or dad anymore. And
Right,
more and more, there are more and more women that are losing custody of their children. And that is, that is changing. It's growing. So we really have to help support parents all the way around. So this is
Absolutely.
just kind of wrapping it up into a nice package between all of us.
And you guys,
Yeah.
you might notice that you're going to have probably more men watching you than you believe, because I know Eric and I are always shocked at the amount of females and women
Yeah.
we have watching us. But, I listen to you guys, and I'm very thankful for you, because you're telling your story. And myself, having a daughter and a son that I'm alienated from, I'm very interested in what you have to say, because you guys have gone through what my children are going through. So I think a
Well,
lot
and
of
that's
men,
important.
yeah, I
Yeah,
think a
that's
lot of men
important
are going
because
to be able
we
to
have,
relate.
yeah, women are difficult creatures, right? We are emotional. And those of us that didn't learn how to deal with emotions, it's really hard to figure that one out. So by offering this and by having a conversation with people that have gone through this, we're hoping that we can help everyone understand, because it's not about how do I battle this person. It's about how can I co-parent with this person? How can I be the best person I need to be for that child? And this is that preparation I was sharing with you earlier. When it's time for you to reunite with your son and your daughter, are you ready? And what do we need to do to get you there? Because if I were to go back to my dad and he was to puke on me, for lack of a better word, if he was to say, oh my gosh, this happened. Can you believe your mom swung an axe at me? I mean, there's so many things that have happened. And if he would have done that, I would have went, whoa, I'm done. I'm out. You would have had that one date and you wouldn't see me again. So how do we get you to that second date? How do we get you to dinner? How do we get you to Christmas? How do we get you to have family reunions with the extended family? That's where we want to get you. It's not just about, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and it's really just kind of delving deeper into the mind of an alienated child and what we go through. And even as adults, you know, if it does go that long, you know, what's going on in our emotional world and what's going on in our head, and the effect of being manipulated your entire life, and of how that could possibly manifest and affect the relationship at first. And I think, you know, I know just off of my article, I've gotten hundreds and hundreds of messages from dads with daughters just really so curious as to what I was going through, and at the time why I didn't contact my dad, and what it would take for me to contact my father. And so I think that that's a really important aspect to what Chris mentioned, because I do think that there are a lot of dads out there wondering, you know, if they'll ever have a relationship with their child again.
I get a lot of questions too about, you know, what would you think, or how should I respond? And one of the best things that my dad did when we reunited is he didn't say a word. He just sat and listened. He said, I have thought about you every single day and I missed you. That was his message to me. And as we started talking and as we started sharing, he would open up little by little, but he never started, he never initiated, he never threw it at me. He let me pull it out. And that's kind of where you have to be, because it's different for me because I don't have that close relationship with my mom. But if I did, the last thing I want to hear from you is bashing her, because that puts me in the middle again. Now I'm pitted, and we got to get away from putting that child into that position. That relationship has nothing to do with the kid.
Right.
So it has to be above that. And it's all about your relationship with your kid, not the other parent.
That's right.
You know, I think this is an amazing thing, because a lot of times when we're talking, they'll be like, you know, we have to say and moms too. And we get that because we understand that that's going on. But as a father, there's certain things that me and Chris are not going to be able to relate with a mother. So this is why it's so important to have y'all here. And I'd like to say, because there's stereotypes against us dads, the angry dad, and that's why the deadbeat dad exists, is because that stigma has went against us for so long. However, on the other hand, one thing I would like you ladies to touch on, if you are a single mom that does not have custody of your children, you are looked at as the scum of society. You had to just do something so wrong. And
more
and more
these
it's almost
days.
The antithesis of the deadbeat dad. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was going through when it first started, people, I mean, I was just beside myself, and people would just be, well, what did you do? And it was such a feeling of shame, and I didn't do anything, you know. And it's so hard to sit there and say, look, I raised her. He was an absent parent until I asked for a divorce, and nobody believes you. Nobody wants to listen.
You
And
had
then
to have done something.
yeah, exactly. You had to have done something. And it was always being accused of having a drug problem, alcohol problem, or doing something to absolutely endanger my child, none of which ever happened. And so it was just such a frustrating feeling because no one believed me and everyone looked down on me. And I remember I was just starting off in a brand new career in a new place, and off the bat, immediately being judged and shunned. And kind of no one wanted anything to do with me. And I already felt left out because here I am. I just remember sitting crying, just missing being able to go to the fridge and get my daughter a Capri Sun. And here are all these moms, you know, at work, bringing their daughters in, bringing their kids in, and talking about all the things they're going to do with them. And it was just really hard. And I just didn't know a single other mother who had gone through what I
When
was
it's not
going
something
through.
you want to talk about either. You don't bring that up at
Well, no,
standing in line at Starbucks or anything. It's just not talked about.
Well, and it was just such a sinking feeling in my stomach because there are times where people would ask a lot of questions and it would just get brought up that I had a daughter, and then it would be like, well, where is she? And it's like, oh, well, she lives with her dad. And then it's like, so you just abandon your daughter, you know, and then you start dating someone, and then you're just a terrible human being, and you just ditched your child just because you wanted to go be with someone, and it turns into that. So, you know, I've heard it all, and we live in a society where that, like you said, that's our default judgment. A mom gets her kid taken away, she must be a drug addict or something, and it's just really. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off at all.
No, go ahead.
I was just thinking, when, you know, growing up, my dad wasn't there, and my stepdad was always gone. And then, you know, my experience with my marriage, where my ex-husband didn't change diapers. I had to, if I needed to go to the store and get milk, I had to take all 3 kids with me. You know, to me, fathers didn't do a lot. And if you think back, you know, back in the, I want to say olden days, but, you know, there was a time where men did all of the work and women stayed home, and that was the way it was. But today, I am more and more impressed with seeing fathers actually wanting to be a part of their children's lives, actually taking part and taking that responsibility. I see more and more, and I love it. I went somewhere one time and I saw a dad grab a diaper bag, and I'm like, where is he going? And he actually went and took care of his child. And I think that is so important, that we as society realize that 2 parents step up to the plate. And when both of them are doing what's best for their child, that is the most important thing to the child.
I'm curious, how many parents do you think are out there, divorced parents, that are in high conflict that would not have been there if not for family court?
A lot.
Yeah.
I think they perpetuate it, to be honest with you. And to speak on that just for a quick second, we actually went through that with my husband. Everything was going well, and it was amicable, and you know, everything was fine as far as custody. But someone gave advice to his ex-wife that she should get an attorney, and that attorney set off a storm of extremely high conflict that turned into years of high conflict.
Well, and everybody's talking about the Marriage Story right now with Scarlett Johansson, and I keep saying Kylo Ren because I don't know his real name, but it's the same thing. You just described exactly what that movie is about. So it is very common, and more people are talking about that and opening up about that. And that, I think, is an important element to point out, that we got to remove that conflict from the courtroom if it can be done amicably. And there is no domestic violence or child abuse, because there's 3 things that can disqualify you from being a parent. You know, that's abuse, right? Neglect or lack of participation, which that's both of those are 1, and then death. Everything else, the parent is still qualified to be a parent. So when you end up going into the court system and now it's adversarial and you're fighting over who gets more control over the child or who has to pay more than the other, then that's when things start breaking down. And when you can communicate between each other, you may not like each other anymore, but you can still co-parent. And when you can keep that adversarial piece out of it, which attorneys are, that's their job. Their job is to fight. Their job is to go in there and fight for you. So they think they're doing the right thing by getting the most they can for the one person, but it's destroying the whole family unit.
You know, it's crazy because we talk about how, and we just had Dr. Warren Farrell on the podcast yesterday talking about this. We find people coming to the movement and our issues right in the heat of their conflict, and they're very angry. And a lot of times they've got a righteous anger. But I think, you know, finding that place that we can get them and heal. We were also talking yesterday about, I don't know how it is where y'all are and when you got divorced, did you have to take a co-parenting class?
No.
Okay. Well, here in Georgia, you have to take a co-parenting class, and it's much like when you get a bunch of these angry dads together, they just start getting riled up unless you have somebody there to say, hey, you know, we understand where you're at. Let's talk about this and let's get you in a place of healing. You put these people in, you put these people in a divorcing class together, and it's just a bunch of people that have been there in high conflict and they're feeding off each other. What if they had something that actually, like some type of course to sit down with the mom and dad and say, hey, this is co-parenting. Let's try some communication skills and get off on the right foot. I'm actually a very big fan of these co-parenting apps and emails too.
Yeah, that is actually probably the best way of handling it. And I've said this a couple of times where if you're getting a divorce, you don't have kids, have at it. Go ahead, get a divorce. If you have kids, then there's certain things that you have to accomplish before you can get that final decree. And those things mean that you have to learn how to co-parent. And then there has to be some element of how not to treat that other parent. So how that looks, I don't know. That's something we're going to have to build, and we're going to have to, you know, have that established. But people do need to learn how to co-parent when they're no longer together parenting.
Yeah, instead of spending all family court, spending all its money on
spend it on your kid
and ad litem. Yeah, spend it on educating parents on how to co-parent.
Unfortunately, the main thing with co-parenting and with divorce, and the reason divorce happens is probably a lot in the same, and it's lack of communication skills.
Lack of communication.
You know, and I think if they had better communication skills before this, they might not even go through that divorce. You just got to learn to talk to each other.
Well, had I known about how to deal with emotions better, had I known how to deal with conflict better, well, one, I probably wouldn't have chosen him to get married to. That's besides the point. I didn't know how to deal with him. I had no business being married to him. And it was set up to fail from the very beginning. Had I known differently, and maybe I was up for that challenge, I would have been better at that communication. I would have been better at expressing my feelings and knowing when I needed to talk about that. So we definitely are a society of chain reactions, of just reacting instead of responding.
That is awesome. Well, ladies, I tell you what, I'm excited about this one. This is something that we've been wanting for a long time. And I believe there's a lot of mothers, because half of our audience is mothers. They're going to be glad that we finally got a platform over here that they can go and listen to. And we've got to be able to switch it up. And maybe we can have some conversations between the two podcasts every once in a while. You know, Chris, when we need to understand women and their emotions sometimes, we've got two people to pick on right here.
You do?
We'll do our best.
Yeah. Anyway, ladies, so you want to tell everybody when your podcast will be going? I believe it's going to be airing on Fridays.
Friday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I believe. Is that what we agreed to?
Yep, every Friday.
Good.
Yep.
I know. All right, everybody. Well, usually we would take this podcast out with the Stay Cool, Stay Dead, but I'm going to sit back and I'm going to let y'all close this podcast out and tell everybody bye.
Oh, boy.
On the spot.
Yeah, you really threw them to the wolves right there.
Did I say that go for it, Christina.
You want me to do it?
Oh, wow. High five, Dawn. Way to roll that bus in there.
Well, I will. Dawn and I are so excited to be able to provide this platform for everyone, and we can't wait. I believe our first show is on the 22nd. Is that correct?
22nd, 21st. Don't have a
It might be the 21st. I think we're doing
Yeah,
the
the
22nd with Kelly Jones.
I see. So February 21st. And our first show will be live. We can't wait. And stay cool, stay mom.
Yeah.
And we'll see you soon.
And I think we are going to interview each other.
I think so, yes. That first show, we will, we want to be able to introduce everyone to us. So anyone who hasn't had an opportunity to know our story, we're kind of going to abridge it a little, and we'll bounce back and forth and kind of let everyone know our stories, and they can get a better understanding of who we are, where we came from, and what we can bring to the table for them.
I've got a little bit of an
besides,
idea.
it's hard to schedule someone to be on a show that nobody knows anything about yet. So.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. And we want to hear from you guys what you want to see. We want to hear from you guys who you want interviewed, who do you want on the show, what do you want to know about,
what do you want us to talk about?
Chris?
Yeah.
I've got a good idea. So your closing tagline. Why don't we let the community give you guys some ideas down in the comments below this chat? So of course, Eric, he came up with stay cool, stay dad. Let's see what the community think yours should be. And if there's any ones that you really like, you can pick that, and that person can be like, I picked that every time they watch your show.
Yeah.
Cool. Keep it clean, though.
There you go. That's the tagline now.
All right. All right, everybody. We will see you next week for the first episode of Mom Talk Today.
All right. I can't wait. See you guys.
See
Bye.
you guys. Bye.